Well, thank you all so much for joining me and my special guest. I'll introduce in a moment. My name is Andrew Romanoff. You are joining our virtual town hall, one of a series we have held over the last 2 months or so. You can find all of these events at andrewromanoff.com. You can find past town halls and other videos at andrewromanoff.com/videos. We're not too creative in naming these websites. And you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at Romanoff 2020. Before I bring on my friend Joe Salazar, I want to just bring you all up to date on some news from the campaign trail. You may remember about a month ago, I challenged Don Hickenlooper, the last remaining Democratic candidate in this race, to a series of debates. He told me he'd get back to me, or his scheduler would. That didn't happen. It's not a great surprise. He skipped 19 debates even before the pandemic hit. He said he needed more sleep at one point, or he had some scheduling conflicts. I don't know. Anyway, Cory Gardner got in on the act. He has accepted invitations to debates other than the one hosted by 9 News. And he asked if the Democratic nominee, Hick, or I would join him. I say yes, I will. In fact, I told Cory just a couple nights ago, we shouldn't wait. I'll debate him now. I know that Hick's not that into me, but I will go toe-to-toe with Cory Gardner starting next week. Senator Gardner, if you're watching or your handlers are, I welcome you to join us on Tuesday night at 5 p.m. at this channel, andrewromanoff.com/live, or come on again Friday at noon. I'll debate you as much as you want. I disagree with you on almost everything, so I think we'll have a very robust debate if you're willing to show up. One person who is showing up in every way for our state throughout his career, both in and out of public office, is my friend Joe Salazar. He was a state representative. He's now the leader of a group called Colorado Rising. He has brought to public office and now to his advocacy work and his legal work an undying commitment to justice in every form, environmental justice and racial justice, the moral justice that is lacking from our country in so many walks of life. And maybe that'll be the theme of our conversation today. So to Joe Salazar, I want to say thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your support. Thanks for what you do every day.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Andrew. And hello, everybody out there. Love you guys. And thank you for allowing me to be on here with you, Andrew. You know, I've been getting a lot of phone calls, a lot of support for my endorsement of Andrew Romanoff these past couple of days. And I've also gotten some questions too about, you know, what my process was in deciding to endorse in a primary where there are 2 Democrats, and you know, what kind of process do I go through when people ask me for my endorsement. And Andrew will testify that my endorsement process is pretty tough, right?
The
And
toughest.
so will others, yeah. So would others, including a friend of mine. He's been my friend for over 40 years, who decided to run for city council. I put him through the gauntlet too, because for me, it's not about personality. It's not about personal things. It's about the state of Colorado and finding out if that person is the right person to run for the office, and someone who I would endorse. And so I employed the same strategy here. You know, as we all know, we had a lot of candidates at the beginning, and then we started to whittle them all down. And some of them asked me for endorsements. Some of them have known me for a long time. Others had not. And so I basically said, hey, look, I'm not going to endorse until we have an absolutely known field in the Democratic primary. And certainly we had women of color who were running, and I wasn't going to endorse one over the other. I mean, it was a long process. But even through that, I still sat down with people, still had conversations with people, including Andrew. And Andrew and I have talked numerous times for countless hours about a number of issues, including criminal justice, about immigration, about environment, about the state of the federal government altogether, about the COVID response and things of that nature. You know, he and I have talked about this, and you know, throughout I pepper in our discussions an awful lot of my questions about how he would handle things as a U.S. Senator. And so what it did come down to was the issue of, and I'm sure everybody is aware of it, of the 2006 legislative session, and the role that Andrew played in that legislation, the legislative session that led to the passage of SB 90 and 1023, and then our acts moving forward to repeal it in 2013. And Andrew has been very candid with me. And I think that that's the relationship that we have. He and I can be very candid with each other. And he was very candid with me when he talked about the fact that that is singularly the one of the biggest mistakes that he ever did as an elected official. He understood the harm. I talked to him about the harm because as the legislator who led the efforts to repeal SB 90, I told him the stories about what happened with people in the community on SB 90, the racial profiling, the pickups by police for, quote, failure to use a turn signal and other pretextual things like that. And Andrew got it. And I asked him to apologize. That was the big deal for me, as I asked him to apologize, not just to me, but also to publicly apologize. And he did. And he's done it multiple times over. And he's been very frank about his apology. And I know that not everybody watches the town halls, or they may not read the Denver Post, or they might not read a Medium article or other kinds of things, or watch Brother Jeff, but he has said it, right? And he's even taken it a step further, saying, okay, I recognize that some of the community members may not see those things. I'm happy to sit down with them and talk with them about this, and to explain that I am so sorry, right? That's a sign of a leader, is when a leader can recognize something that they did wrong and apologize for it. And that's what I wanted to see with Andrew, because we align on so many other things already. We align on the environment and the fact that we have to have a Green New Deal, and that we have to, transition over from fossil fuels as soon as possible into green, clean energies and technologies, and that how Colorado can be ground zero for that. Instead of ground zero, the frack zone that we see happening in Erie and Broomfield, Thornton, Commerce City, and the surrounding areas, right? We agree on criminal justice reform, on the issues of racial justice. We agree on, what's happening with our federal government, and the fact that, we have way too many Democrats who are willing to tip their hat to the big interests, which will then harm the individual interests, the interests of the people, right? We agree on those things. We agree on foreign policy and how to take a look at foreign policy. And we agree on the one fundamental thing above everything else, that we have to beat Cory Gardner. And that he has the best shot on beating Cory Gardner too, right? I mean, Cory Gardner is not liked here in the state of Colorado except by Trump, right? And some of the people who follow them. But we know that we got to get rid of Cory Gardner. And so who I want to see as a senator is someone I'm able to speak with, someone I'm able to text or to give a call to and say, hey, man, look, I have this issue, or the community has this issue. Give me a call. And I know that person will give me a call, because that happens now. Andrew, give me a call. I need to talk to you about something, and boom, sometimes within a matter of seconds. Sometimes it takes a little while because he has something else to do, but he always gets back to me, right? You think that happens with the other two? Think that happens with Cory Gardner when he dodges his responsibilities to meet with constituents? It doesn't, unless you pay him a lot of money. Then he might meet with you. Do you think that happens with John Hickenlooper? That doesn't either, right? I know he doesn't want to meet with anybody. He doesn't even want to come to any forums.
So he's not that into you either.
It's not that. Well, I guess he should be, since I'm his longstanding nemesis. But here's the point, though, right? The point is that if they're not showing up for you now, they'll never show up for you. And if you're not giving them a pretty penny to help get them elected, then you mean nothing to them. And that's not how Andrew is acting. Andrew is meeting with anybody who is willing to sit down and talk with him. And he's showing up to the candidate forums. He wants to hear from you, and he also wants to be able to answer your questions. That's the deliberative process that I went through before I decided to endorse Andrew Romanoff. And I hope that a lot of you go through that deliberative process too, because it's really super important that we just don't endorse people because they're friends or whatever, that our endorsements mean something for the entire state. So there we go.
I appreciate everything that you're saying, and I won't sugarcoat any of it, because this has been a long conversation you and I have had, not just in the course of this campaign, Joe, but obviously, but dating back many years. I'm glad that you all were able to remedy some of the mistakes that I made, and I'm sorry for in particular the pair of bills that you mentioned. I've asked Seth just now to put up the context, so we'll add to our chat line here a reference to the Medium story that you mentioned. around the immigration decisions in 2006. It's a regret, as I said, even before I joined this race, that I'll take to my grave. But I don't want to lose sight of the lessons that I've learned. Look, if you all who are watching this show are holding out for a candidate who's never made a mistake, you're probably not going to cast a ballot in this race. As Joe said, the real question is whether you can acknowledge and learn from your mistakes and lead forward. I didn't start this campaign with the answer to every question. It's one of the reasons I call Joe so often, because I'm trying to learn from him and from others as well. And we're trying to build a coalition here that includes folks committed, just as we are, to comprehensive immigration reform. I'll just share with you a quick story. 14 years ago, in 2006, the legislature sent a resolution to Congress, bless you, and we didn't hear back. In fact, it's been since 1986, Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that Congress has actually taken on comprehensive immigration reform or passed a law to that effect. The resolution that we sent out of the state capitals said, here's what we think you ought to do, and I remain committed to the path that we laid out, which means citizenship that doesn't take decades on end. So many folks are dying, literally, to contribute to this country, and then we toss them to the curb or condemn them to kind of a second-class citizenship where they're forced to work in the shadows. So we're going to devote more time to this conversation as well. We can talk about it a little bit today, and to the other issues that Joe's raised, including the cause that unites us all, or at least should if you live on Earth, the cause of the climate action. And I want to just localize that conversation with you if I can, Joe. So
yeah.
You and I both served in the state legislature, made some progress on this front. When I was there, we adopted what now seems like a very tame renewable energy portfolio standard, a measure that went to the ballot and tried to get Colorado to obtain more of its electricity needs from renewable sources. But I think we also recognize a state can't save a planet. So for all the progress we're making in Colorado, we need international commitment to this cause, and I'd like the U.S. to lead the way. Can you tell us, just share for folks who might not be familiar, a little bit with your work at Colorado Rising and the efforts that you all are making to mitigate the damage of the previous administration?
Oh, it's been horrible, Andrew, having to litigate every step of the way the decisions of the Hickenlooper administration. He left us a wreck of a Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission that doesn't believe that oil and gas can do anything wrong. During the Hickenlooper administration, the COGCC never denied a permit. We're talking tens of thousands of permits that were awarded to the oil and gas industry under John Hickenlooper. We warned about this as legislators. We warned about this decision to allow oil and gas to proliferate in the state of Colorado. We warned about the orphan wells that would end up happening once oil and gas started to leave the state of Colorado, which it didn't take long in my tenure as a legislator to realize, because in 2018 we had to throw 5.4 million additional taxpayer dollars to clean up the oil and gas orphan wells. We warned him about that, and he didn't want to listen. Some people warned him about not drinking fracking fluid. I didn't want him. I figured, hey, look, you want to get diarrhea, that's your problem.
This is a family show. I actually don't know what I tell people he drank the fracking fluid and they think it's a metaphor. It was. Oh,
he drank the fracking fluid. He literally talked about drinking fracking fluid and how safe it was. It's garbage, right? But what we've had to go through as an organization to protect people in Broomfield and Commerce City, in Longmont and Larimer County and all over the place, it has been just absolutely astronomical, the extent that we've had to go through to fight for people. I am happy to say that in those cases where we have entered our appearance on behalf of communities, we've been able to halt the permitting. Literally, cases have now gone into postponed indefinite status because we've entered our appearance and we are asking questions through discovery that the oil and gas industry does not want to answer. So we're taking it step at a time. We're chipping away at it little by little, and we're going to be successful, right? Senate Bill 181, which was passed last year to reverse an awful lot of what the Hickenlooper administration has done, that is slowly working its way through the process, right? Meanwhile, kids are getting spontaneous nosebleeds. We're finding that they have benzene in their bloodstreams. We have kids up at Bella Romero, a school, an elementary school in Greeley that is about 90% free and reduced school lunch kids, as well as primarily migrant kids. We have them exposed to really toxic gases, right? And this is all because of John.
And I pause just on this point, and I think you and I, most of the viewers know the answer, but we ought to spell it out. The fact is, a lot of the casualties of this runaway oil and gas development the Governor Hickenlooper approved happens to fall, the damage happens to fall disproportionately on low-income communities and communities of color, including some that you just mentioned. So how does that play out? Is it because they don't have the political power to resist the approval process? So if you're in a wealthier, whiter neighborhood, for example, you might be able to stop the development?
Yeah, so Suncor is located purposefully where it's located, right? I mean, we have Globeville, Swansea, Elyria, we have those communities right there, which is, primarily people of color, primarily poor, and they threw that refinery right there. And then on the north side, you have Commerce City, which is primarily people of color and primarily poor, right? So it's not a surprise that environmental racism has existed in the state of Colorado. And it's not a surprise that that system was perpetuated under John Hickenlooper. Because when I was a state rep, Suncor was belching all their pollutants into the air or dumping it into the Platte, and we couldn't find any relief at all under the Hickenlooper administration. And it's no surprise too that at Bella Romero, that the original siting of that drill site was supposed to be closer to a rich, white, affluent school. I'm not advocating that it should be around any school, but to prove the point is it was supposed to be there. And those families rallied around the community and said, not in my backyard. So they threw it in the backyard of poor brown people, right? Hickenlooper administration, despite knowing this, because people called this to his attention, he didn't care. He allowed that permit to go through, and now we're seeing the disastrous effects on poor brown kids. So, I mean, when you really want to think about who, as a leader, has harmed our communities, don't forget that point, that John Hickenlooper was the head of an administration that couldn't have given a damn about what was happening in Commerce City or what was happening in Bella Romero.
It's worth pointing, and it's worth pointing out, if Hick or his handlers are watching too, I want to give them equal time. You're welcome to come on this show, such as it is, next week, open invitation. If this doesn't work, if Tuesday at 5, Friday at noon, when we hold these virtual town halls, is not convenient, pick a different time. Pick your own Zoom channel. I'm eager and willing to debate, and it is striking to me, and ought to be really unacceptable to voters, I imagine, that John has now gone 9 months since he joined this race without answering a single question from any of his Democratic opponents. As Joe pointed out earlier, there were 20 of us in this race at one point. Hick skipped 19 of these debates. We had a forum last week sponsored by a group called Indivisible Northern Colorado, group Joe knows. And the conditions were that I not be allowed to ask John any questions or reference him in any way. It wasn't a debate. And I don't know that Cory Gardner is going to be quite so gentle and pull his punches. So I think these are issues worth airing. And if there's a rebuttal that Hick wants to offer, come on the show. If you want to beat Cory Gardner, you got to get through me. And that means you have to answer questions. It's not just me you're disrespecting or our audience. It's Colorado College, it's UCCS, it's Metro, it's Regis, it's the NAACP, it's the Progressive Veterans of El Paso County. You skipped all of their candidate forums too, John. You didn't send a surrogate. You didn't offer an explanation. You disrespected them. And Colorado deserves better. It's just a little commercial announcement here.
Andrew, I guess the larger point being is that when you don't even want to, when you don't even want the job, why be held accountable for it? Right? Maybe that's his train of thought.
It's reverse psychology. He's saying, please don't elect me to the Senate. But whatever you do, we're happy to comply. We'll spare you that burden. And I think a point you made earlier, Joe, is spot on too. Like, if you can't be bothered to show up and answer questions now when you need something from us, like our vote, then why on earth would we expect you to show up when you get to public office? Cory Gardner's already shown that he doesn't have that interest. I mean, he's gone, what, more than 2.5 years now without a town hall meeting. As part of the job description, it should be a low bar. People aren't expecting that you always agree with them, and you and I don't agree on everything, I imagine, but at least you show up. This is a very baffling Alice in Wonderland world that we've entered, where I'm arguing, as you said, with a guy who doesn't want the job, said he'd be terrible at it, hate doing it, and isn't cut out for it. I believe him.
Right.
I don't want to lose sight of the issues here, because you're right, I think, to spell out the connection here between the environmental crisis we face and the moral crisis we face, and the impact it's having on kids and families' health. You and I went up just last week to Broomfield, part of this frack zone, to look at a place that's been ground zero as well in the fracking war. And I know, because I heard from a lot of the neighbors in Anthem Ranch and the several meetings that we've had there and candidate events, that they were not too happy. Do you want to describe a little bit of what's unfolding in Broomfield?
Sure. So the one pad, it's or the one community, two communities. You have Anthem Ranch, but you also have Wildgrass. And literally, just in the past year, we've had 4 wildgrass cases, right? And so basically, what happens is you have the oil and gas industry come into these communities, and you know they don't care if there's human beings living around these zones, right? They come in and they paint this pretty picture about, oh, there's going to be this economic boom for your city, and you know, we're going to be paying so many taxes, and we're going to make sure it's safe, you know. And then they spin this narrative that we all know is a lie, that you know, this is the greatest thing ever. Okay, and then you have community members who are pretty savvy, and the Wildgrass area is a pretty affluent community, and they're like, no, we're not going to believe your lies. We're going to challenge your permits. So they go in front of the COGCC on
the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission.
Yeah, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and they challenge their permits, and the Hickenlooper administration he just approves them. Well, here's the thing: is that now Broomfield, which has, you know, $1 million homes around it, and we have Commerce City too that doesn't have $1 million homes around it. We have all these permits that allow them to just stick their straws in the ground wherever they want to do it, and just frack the hell out of the place, right? Well, sure enough, Broomfield has now realized, well, it's hurting their air quality. They're concerned about water quality. They're concerned about the odor. They've asked the COGCC to intervene to stop them from using a flammable drilling mud, right? The noise is just constant. It's a constant pounding. You know, imagine that. All hours of the day, just a constant pounding, right? And it's really disrupt their lives quite a bit. Let's also remember too that we have had just recently explosions in the state of Colorado at these sites. We had one up in Platteville on a site operated by PDC, right? So you have all this stuff happening, but in that area, the Broomfield, Erie area, and now Thornton, in that area, there is a high concentration of permits, and we have them trying to drill now. That's where we've intervened to try to stop all this stuff. And so far, we've been pretty successful stopping it. But this is the culture that was developed under John Hickenlooper's administration, right? And it's a shameful culture because people are being harmed.
But that's the point, is that there are actually human lives at stake here. And I think the conversation we're having now confirms people's sort of worst suspicions about the way this pay-to-play political system operates, right? I mean, it's not an accident that both Cory Gardner and John Hickenlooper have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars throughout their career or more from the oil and gas industry. It's not the goodness of its heart that leads a giant corporation to make a contribution like that. It technically doesn't have a heart, despite what the Supreme Court might tell you. It's not actually a person. It's because it gets something in return, and we get the bill. And I want to make sure we have time to talk about solutions. I'm glad and grateful for the work that you and your team are doing, Joe. But as you and I discussed last week, it shouldn't take an ex-legislator or a band of advocates to remedy this damage or take these companies to court. For one thing, there's a power imbalance here, right? So you're up against massive arsenal of corporate power on the other side. But for another, we ought to have public policies in place that protect communities. I mean, that's the point of public policy. It's weird to have to defend this ground, but it seems like we've lost sight of it in some of in the Hickenlooper administration. So when it comes to policy, what would you like to see to make sure, first of all, that families don't face the kind of damage that you described going forward?
So what we have asked is that all permits be paused, right? Just right now, just pause them all. The industry has enough permits out there to keep them busy, and I think what they said for the next 5 years, right? No new permits, just pause them all. Meanwhile, we need to have a rapid transition over to a green, clean energy economy. Rapid transition. I'm talking in the next 2 years. We also need to engage the hemp community because hemp is a carbon sequestering crop. It literally draws in that pollution and draws it into itself. It is God's gift in terms of a plant, just like all plants are. But this one, man, I'm telling you, just the effects that it has are just astounding. And so what we need to do is we need to coalesce around that industry and to create jobs here, as well as the green, clean industries of solar and wind and others. So we need to do that like right away. We don't have any more time. And that's the thing about people though, isn't it, Andrew? Is that we say, there's no more time left. We got to take care of this right now. And people are like, oh yeah. We got another 20 years, and we literally don't. And so that's why it needs to be a rapid transition over.
Well, we've laid out a very aggressive timetable. I mean, the best estimates I've seen suggest the world has got to get to this carbon-free or at least net zero economy by 2050. The U.S. ought to be leading the way and get there at least 10 years ahead of schedule, and we shouldn't be waiting. I take your point. Maybe one of the lessons you draw from the pandemic is that people can change our behavior when we have to. And we've seen, as folks drive less, we're seeing a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, including carbon pollution. So it's not like we can't solve this crisis. We just lack the leadership to get from here to there. I'm also glad, by the way, Joe, that you mentioned hemp, because I know our friend Mike Bowman and other advocates have been leading that cause for a long time. And there's got to be a role for agriculture to play, regenerative agriculture, carbon sequestration, literally paying farmers to bury the pollution underground. I mean, or to capture it in their crops. I mean, that's part of the solution too. One of the conversations I'm sure you've had with fossil fuel workers, not the high paid executives necessarily or the lobbyists, I'm talking about the people who are actually laying pipe and drilling wells and doing this often dangerous work, is that they want to know they're not going to be left high and dry, right? I mean, they've got families to feed and bills to pay. And I've had these conversations too. I want to make sure that they can take jobs in the clean energy industry where there are twice as many jobs to be had. But that's going to require some training and education and support. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be free. But I think we ought to make that investment rather than treat people like collateral damage. Have you had similar conversations?
I have. I've had a lot of conversations with, particularly union members like the pipe fitters and IBEW members, and they are concerned, and they should be concerned. They know that this industry is dying, I really wish that we could work more collaboratively with them in terms of transitioning over. The state of Colorado last year passed a bill to transition over coal workers
Right.
into other industries, and we need to do the exact same thing for oil and gas. That needs to happen both at the state level as well as on the federal level. That's the whole purpose or one of the purposes of the Green New Deal, is that we transition people over, right? And we make sure that landing is as gentle as possible. As we get them educated, get them paid, and move them on over. I mean, that's the direction we have to go. There is no two ways about it. The fossil fuel industry is the industry of the 20th century. We're in the 21st century now, and we should really grow up.
Yeah, no, it's true. And most of the workers I've met acknowledge that as well. I mean, they can see the market, even before the latest drop in oil prices, they could see the market making solar and wind, as you said, cost competitive with oil and gas. So the real question to my mind is not, and to their mind is not whether we're going to make this shift. It's when, and whether we can provide some support for those families along the way. I don't want, and I know you don't either, I don't want to force people to choose between protecting their paycheck and protecting the planet. It's a false choice. I mean, we can do both, but we've got to make a commitment as a country, and we've got to get some of these fossil fuel funded candidates out of the way. There's a video, by the way, and I don't know, Seth is the unseen administrator of this whole conversation. At some point, we should post the conversation that Hick had with a Sunrise activist, Sunrise Movement, one of the groups that signed on to our campaign at first asked Hick if he would sign the No Fossil Fuel
Yeah.
Money Pledge. And the video is a little comical. He says, sure, it does. And then learns what's in it and then scratches his name off, because it's a pledge that forbids you from taking contributions of a certain amount from oil and gas executives or their lobbyists. I think the folks you surround yourself with, like any part of human nature, are the people that most shape your views. Cory Gardner's taken more money from the fossil fuel industry than all but one other member of Congress. Not a great surprise. He sits on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. They got something to gain by padding his pockets and paying his bills.
Yeah, totally. Look, I watched that video. I wasn't astounded by it. I was kind of astounded at the fact that Hickenlooper acted the way that he did. But it's no great surprise to me that, he tries to save his own political butt as much as possible at the detriment of so many others. And so with those activists saying, hey, look, we want to make sure that you're not going to accept this money. We're going to hold your feet to the fire on this. And, you could see him churning it in his mind that, oh my goodness, this hurts my political self. I'm not going to do it. So it wasn't a great surprise, but that's the history of John Hickenlooper is how can he move forward with his own political career and, be damned anybody else's, concerns or health or safety.
Yeah, well, it's one reason we ought to be replacing Cory Gardner with somebody who actually cares about these issues. I was proud in the course of her exit from the campaign to get an endorsement from Diana Bray, another climate activist, as you've been, an environmental champion, along with Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, Food and Water Watch, Our Revolution, the Sunrise Movement, as I mentioned, a group of young people who are probably doing more than most of the adults were paying in Washington to address this crisis. And we just had, along with a couple other candidates, a virtual phone bank the other night that signed on something like 400 people. I don't remember the exact total. So it's a radical proposition. We're trying to figure out, could you build an army of activists powerful enough to counter all the corporate cash that's coming out of Washington and all the power play that this political establishment is bringing to bear on this campaign? The good news is people in Colorado actually still cherish the right to vote. I know it's a quaint notion, but guys like Chuck Schumer don't actually vote in Colorado. They just act that way.
Yeah, and I know that I've been remiss in not talking about Cory Gardner. It's been an awful lot of focus on Hickenlooper. Maybe that's why the press calls me his longstanding nemesis. But but by and large, I mean, it really comes down to this. Andrew, you're going to win this primary. You're going to beat Cory Gardner. Cory Gardner is despised in this state. We saw through him pretty quickly. Well, many of us already saw through him before he was even elected. But the state saw through him shortly after he was elected, and the fact that he's just a political hack who is willing to do the bidding of these really outrageous groups and this outrageous president, right? And so I feel very confident in saying that once you get through this primary, you're going to be our next U.S. senator. It's right here and right now that really matters, right? We need to blast through this mythology of Hickenlooper being the only one who can beat Cory Gardner. We know that that's just absolutely and abundantly false. And we need to blast through that and also expose the Hickenlooper that people either are refusing to see or just don't know as of yet, and expose him for what he is. He's a huckster. He's a snollygoster, as I called him when I was at the legislature. A snollygoster is a politician who acts with no morals except the moral of making sure that they get reelected. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I served with Cory Gardner, just to underline this point. For 4 years, we served in the State House together. As I mentioned earlier, I think I disagree with him on pretty much everything. There are some issues where we might find common ground, but I'm glad that you shattered this myth. Even Hickenlooper himself said, we don't need him to beat Cory Gardner. And maybe, again, we could post the video where John said repeatedly in public to the press, I would be a terrible senator. I'm not cut out for it. I don't want to run, and they don't even need me to beat him. The polling shows that Gardner loses even to a generic Democrat by double digits. I'll say this again, because I know it's the heart of Hick's argument is that only he now can somehow beat Gardner. Cory Gardner has an approval rating in the low 30s. He's tied himself to Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell every step of the way, and he loses to even a generic Democrat by double digits. So the real question to my mind is not whether we're going to beat Cory Gardner, it's whether we're going to replace him with somebody who actually stand up and fight for the values that we share. One of the questions that's coming in along those lines has to do with the federal action that we can take. And you and I have spent some time here today, and I appreciate it, Joe, talking a little bit about state policy, because that's where we've spent so much of our careers together. But when it comes to federal action and the Green New Deal, which both Cory and Hick describe as socialism. I think Hick actually invoked Joseph Stalin to demonize this progressive platform. He's trying to one-up Cory in the demagoguery sweepstakes here. Anyway, for those of us actually committed to a rational conversation, not to that kind of outlandish rhetoric, where do you see us going? Could we actually build, as I hope we will, we'll call it a climate conservation corps, take some inspiration from the original New Deal and the Civilian Conservation Corps, and put people back to work building the clean energy infrastructure that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah. So look, I know that people are going to probably shrug at this, but we definitely need to keep the House of Representatives in Democrats' hands, and we need to get the Senate back in Democrats' hands too, and we need to get the presidency back. Now, does that mean that, oh wow, all three chambers are, all three branches, the two branches are controlled by Democrats? No, it's going to take some work, right? It's going to take some real work from real leaders, and that's why it's important to get you there. Because what we need is people not to pass resolutions anymore. Resolutions, the Green New Deal as a resolution, I honor it because that's all they can do right now without having the second chamber. But once we get those chambers back, it needs to be a bill. We need to pass this stuff. It needs to get through, and it needs to get to a president who is willing to sign it. So that's one of the actions that we can take. We also need to reverse what the Trump administration is trying to do on the National Environmental Protection Act, or Policy Act. We need to make sure that whatever they do is stopped by Congress, because the way that they're stripping all the protections away for communities and for the environment is just appalling. I've testified in front of the EPA panel on keeping our protections in place. And it was a kangaroo court. We knew which direction they were going to go, but we need to have a Congress that's willing to keep those policies in place, as well as with clean water and clean air. Right, we have some pretty robust policies in place right now, and we need to make them even more robust. But primarily, we have to change the culture of this country to shift away from fossil fuels and into the 21st century with this new energy and this new technology. We have to do it for our own existence, for God's sakes. And Congress needs to reflect that urgency.
Well, that's the point. I think that there's an urgency to this crisis, and you feel it if you're living in a frack zone and you've seen an increase in birth defects or breathing problems or any of the other health consequences. And you don't feel like this is some distant crisis confined to some far off land. You feel it here and now, and it's affecting your survival. I don't think we're exaggerating the stakes. If you're losing your job now, as by last count, around 39 million Americans and 476,000 here in Colorado have filed unemployment claims just since the pandemic hit, you feel a sense of urgency because you can't pay your bills. And I know that sometimes it seems like the folks in Washington lack, to put it kindly, a sense of urgency. Maybe because if you get to Congress, I mean, you're set. You get a health plan more generous than most Americans. You get a pension, which a lot of people can only dream about. You get a paycheck, even if the government shuts down. So I think it's easy to be insulated from the problems that your constituents face. This is just a question along those lines, I guess. You were a state representative, as I was. How did you maintain a connection to your community?
I was always involved in community before I was a state representative, and I kept those ties. I would give briefings to the community every few months. People were always welcome into my office. I never had a desk in my office. I had a kitchen table because in my family, everyone congregates around the kitchen table, and so people always wanted to come in. I had fruit and other things for them to just sit there and just want to talk. I would always go out, even if it wasn't in my district. I would always go out to speak with people at libraries or at other various places. I just kept myself busy all the time reaching out to community, because I knew as a state representative that I wasn't in that seat for any, illusory magnificence that I thought that I had. I was there because that was the people's seat, and I was responsible to speaking with them. And I never ran away from a town hall, even when things got rough with the gun safety legislation. I had people show up to threaten to do all sorts of things to me. I had to face a lot of racism. I had to move my family out of my house 3 times because of the threats that we were under. And I still showed up to my town halls, right? And I was like, look, I'm going to stand right in front of you and I'm going to talk with you because, well, you're my constituent and I understand that this is your seat and I want to listen to what you have to say, but I also want you to listen to why I voted the way that I did, right?
Sure.
And guess what? It took one town hall and people were okay because they were like, I get it, right? The rhetoric that we're hearing out there, I get it. And that's what we're supposed to do. That's what we're supposed to do. I think that's what leadership is that you face those things and you sit down and talk with people.
It's an uncomfortable conversation, but frankly, the challenge that you and I face as elected leaders were nothing compared to the actual struggles that people are facing every day. Right. So I'm not going to whine about getting a tough question, and you never have either complained about that. We signed up for these jobs, and I'm thinking about the folks that I'm talking to every day. I think I've texted almost 600,000 voters now in the last 8 weeks personally, and people are going through hell. I mean, I'm talking to folks every night who are facing eviction, worried about COVID, of course, wondering whether they're going to have a job to go to when they get up in the morning or how they're going to pay their bills because they've lost their health insurance, as some 43 million Americans might by the time we hit rock bottom. So I'm really resonate with the point you're making about the urgency of this crisis. And it seems to me like this is not a time for timidity. I mean, maybe, I guess, if we were having this conversation like 40 years ago, when Jimmy Carter was installing solar panels on the roof of the White House before Ronald Reagan tore them off, then we could afford to indulge the kind of incremental reform that some candidates are proposing. But I feel like, I think you said this earlier, it's too late for that. We run out the clock on baby steps. We need bold leadership at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, right? I mean, we're going to get a new president, I hope. But if we don't flip the Senate and replace the senators we've got with people actually committed to this cause, not ones like Hick, who are just going to parrot the Republican talking points, we're not going to get any of this done. We got to probably kill the filibuster too. You and I didn't have a filibuster in the legislature. We just acted that way sometimes. I want to make sure we don't shortchange another issue that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about, and we're going to devote another town hall to as well. I'm trying to line up some guests for the topic of criminal justice reform, because I've heard from a lot of people, and you and I know this as well, that the folks who are behind bars today and don't have a lot of advocates speaking out on their behalf in elected office are being condemned in some cases to what amounts to a death sentence, even though that was not the sentence handed down. They're being placed in jails or prisons that have become petri dishes for the coronavirus. And I wonder if you might just share some reflections on the cause, not just during this pandemic, but beyond, about the cause of criminal justice reform.
Sure. So we need to get rid of cash bail system. That's one of the things that we have to do, right? People who are presumed to be innocent until proven guilty are sitting in jail right now, incarcerated, because they don't have the $500 to spend in order to get out of jail. We have to stop that system. It has a disproportionate effect on communities of color, and it's a violation of our constitutional prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, as well as other things. And I really honor the ACLU for taking on that effort, right? We need senators who are willing to take that on as well. The next part of it is that, we do have people who are in jail who are, nonviolent offenders who are still in jail, and these jails are overrun by COVID. Also an issue of the ACLU where they're suing sheriffs to stop that practice of just keeping people there, and that they need to figure out a different way of dealing with those individuals. There's just so much. I mean, the criminal justice system, I used to talk about it in terms of it doesn't start when you're in jail. It starts at police contact, right? It starts at the broken windows, the broken windows policies of the Rudy Giuliani era and things of that nature, where and it also starts in kindergarten now too, right? Like literally we have kids from kindergarten to third grade who are being expelled from school because of quote behavioral issues. I mean, I was a pretty rambunctious kid when I was in elementary school. God knows how many times I would have been expelled, right? And but we have to stop this idea of punishing all the time, right? Whether they're better and different ways of doing things. When I was vice chair of House Judiciary, we looked at those different ways of doing things, and we changed in small steps. We did change the criminal justice system in a lot of different ways, and I was proud to sponsor legislation with then Senator Jesse Ulibarri to make those big changes. And so, we have to take a look at things through a lens of not just punishing, but also a racial justice lens, social justice lens, and what have you. And that's what we need in our senators. We need senators who actually are opening up their minds to these things, right? All too often we get people who are really encapsulated in their own little privileged world and don't want to stretch out to anything else. And I know that through my conversations with you, you're broadening your mind in all sorts of different ways, and that's really refreshing.
I appreciate that. It's more comforting, I think, to exclude any conflicting thoughts, right? It's human nature not to want to accept dissent or acknowledge, as I have, that you've been wrong. It's hard and painful, but nothing compared to the actual consequences of bad decisions. The first job I ever took, Joe, was at the Southern Poverty Law Center. I just turned 21. I moved to Montgomery, Alabama. I wanted to fight the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi groups. One of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had, to get up in the morning and do good and fight evil. I think it's just that clear cut. Unfortunately, I didn't expect to be having the same fight 30 years later, or to find a president of the United States on the other side, positing this absurd notion that there are good people on both sides. It strikes me, though, that in some ways, the racism you see from the Klan is easier to spot because it wears a hood and burns a cross in your lawn. And the more insidious forms of racism that you and I are talking about, which permeate the criminal justice system, which still crop up in forms of discrimination in housing and banking, in lending, in employment, in education, in healthcare. That's harder to eradicate because it's not as visible. And I guess it's worth pointing out, and again, we should have some more time to talk about this, that the clear line that you're drawing, and I think that the evidence draws, between economic power and political power when it comes to the environmental crisis, between racial justice and criminal justice, in a system that disproportionately incarcerates people of color, especially African-American young men. And it strikes me the only way to change that is not just by adopting new policies, but by changing the folks who are making those decisions in the first place, and changing the way that they finance their campaigns.
Absolutely,
because you dance with them that brung you.
Yeah, and Andrew, I was a big opponent of the private prison system. Big opponent. I fought them every single year, right? I used to call them the great immoral dragon of our time. Literally a flesh for cash system, right? Representative Melton and I and Senator Ulibarri moved forward with getting rid of the slavery exception in the Colorado Constitution. And it wasn't just a symbolic thing. It was based on very real things that are happening in our criminal justice system to stop slavery of individuals who are incarcerated, and also to get rid of the private prison system, right? And so, these are things these systems. It's not your fault or my fault. These systems have been built for generations, right? Literally for 100+ years. They've been set and they've been planted for a reason. And so it's our job in this generation to dismantle these things and put something humane together, right? That's what we need in a U.S. senator. And I have confidence that you're going to be able to do that, and that you're going to be able to reach out to people and think in a way that is different than how the system is currently set, because you know that we need to have that done. We need to have that dismantling done.
I have even more confidence that you're going to hold me accountable if I don't. So I'll take that. I'll take that challenge.
Don't make me earn the title of longtime nemesis of Andrew Romanoff.
No, that's a title that I'm just going to reserve for John. And you're right. It goes back for centuries here. These are America's original and persistent sins, right? The sin of slavery and Jim Crow and segregation, and the genocide of the Native American population, and the abrogation of treaties and commitments, and disrepresentation and mistreatment ever since. Yeah, I think you and I share one other commitment here, judging from something you just said. I know that it's easy to stick with the status quo and go with the flow and follow conventional wisdom. That's never been your approach or mine. And I'm reminded a lot of a line Mark Twain once shared. He said, "Loyalty to petrified opinion never broke a chain or freed a human soul." And so I think that's what we're up against, this petrified opinion that says we should keep doing this because we always have. What we're doing isn't working. Business as usual doesn't cut it. Going back to normal isn't good enough. I mean, I think we need to shatter petrified opinion and challenge every bit of conventional wisdom that helped contribute to this mess. I know that Donald Trump didn't invent bigotry. I know that inequality didn't start with the pandemic, but all these problems have become easier to spot for a lot of folks and been exacerbated by the crisis that we're in now. So maybe we should use this time to not to go back to normal, but instead to renew the what we once described as the American dream and make sure that it's not just a paper promise, but a reality.
You know, I would suggest, Andrew, that maybe in future town halls, because we've hit on a couple of things, but one thing that was raised that we really haven't hit on are Indigenous rights issues.
Yes.
You know, the discussion with missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yes.
You know, we also need to talk about you know, our transgender family and
Yes.
all the things that they have faced. I mean, just historically, systematically here in the United States. And I mean, these are really pivotal issues, right? And I just think that would be awesome, man. If you could bring on some panelists, I could certainly recommend an awful lot of Indigenous women who would, you know, just love the opportunity to be able to talk about these things and what to expect from a United States senator, something that they're not getting from the current United States senator, and right, and probably would not get from your opponent either, judging how he's treated Indigenous people.
I'll tell you what, I'll second your proposal. I'll take you up on your offer. If there are people watching who have some suggestions for speakers or panelists or topics for that matter, particularly on the issues that Joe just mentioned, I'm all in.
Yeah.
And I've had some conversations already along these lines, but if we could schedule this next week, I'm open. You all can, who are watching, sorry, that was just somebody calling in now that cut off my feed. You all can share suggestions if you just email us.
I got a suggestion call.
Literally, as we speak. This is my team, by the way, made me promise to upgrade our technology. So I'm talking to you on my phone right now, but I got some better gear in store for next week. I'm gonna guess, I don't want to predict the answer here, that Corey and Hick are not going to be able to make the invitation I extended to them at the beginning of the show. So we'll probably have some time in their absence, Tuesday at 5, Friday at noon. If anybody watching wants to email us, info@andrewromanoff.com, info@andrewromanoff.com, and Seth can probably share the email address on there as well. You've been really generous with your time, Joe, and I want to thank you for everything you said, everything you've done, everything you're going to do, not for me per se, but for our community, because I know for a fact that there will be millions of people, as I tweeted the other day, who live in this state, may never know your name or mine, but will be able to live longer and healthier lives because of the way that you've committed your life. And that is really a tribute, I think, to you.
Thank you, partner. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Owed to my family and ancestors, definitely.
I appreciate that too. And I wish your best to your family. I hope they're staying safe and healthy and putting up with their dad right now.
Barely putting up. All righty, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have another special guest joining us in the last part of our show today, who happens to be celebrating his birthday. I first met Arn Manconi when he was an Eagle County Commissioner. Arn, you're going to have to tell me if we've known each other longer than that. I know you have had a storied career through the mountains of Colorado and share the commitment that Joe and I were just describing, a commitment to a Green New Deal and to environmental justice. In fact, it's not just a commitment, it's a willingness to get arrested over this cause. Do you want to, so let me welcome Arn Manconi.
Andrew, thank you for having me on your show. Thanks this is the best birthday gift anyone could imagine.
Happy birthday to you.
The next U.S. Senator of Colorado, bringing me in. And following Joe Salazar, both of you are leaders and both of you have helped shape me. even though I'm older than both of you.
Hey, how old are you turning today?
Tomorrow I turn 61.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm catching up on you.
Yeah, you are. When I met you, you were 23 years old, Speaker of the House. You, real quickly, folks, I was a county commissioner, and it was 2005, and this man was the Speaker of the House, and I was just like shocked how much he was managing in this world called sausage grinder of policy. He said, we got 700 bills we got to pass this year. He helped shepherd through and pass an early child care expansion bill that myself and others were trying to get through. It made it through the Senate, and it got vetoed under Governor Owens. And ever since then, and most politicians I've known, who I won't name, as they get up in power, have compromised their integrity and on some version sold out to the people. This man never has. So I remember being in something used to call a gym back in January of 2019. I texted Andrew and said, are you going to jump into this race? And he said, are you? And I said, no, I want to back you. And he jumped in, and I've been supporting him. I'm a delegate of his, and he brought me on his green energy policy team. And so it's great. Now I'm running for state Senate in District 8, which is somewhere called Western Colorado. And we have 7 counties. I have an opponent. We're 40 days out or so, and we have about the same amount of money in the bank. I just got endorsed by the Sunrise Movement, who endorsed you, Andrew, because of our fight for the Green New Deal. And also we have a fight for Medicare for all.
You, I know, spent a little bit of time in captivity with the Sunrise activists back at the beginning of the legislative session. And do you want to describe that experience?
Yeah, you know, the gray hair shows that once you get past 60, you get radical. And I started realizing that all of the other ways weren't working. On January, 38 of us were arrested in the state capitol during the State of the State address and thrown in jail. Now, I've been arrested 5 times. One of my idols and everyone else's is Martin Luther King, who was arrested 29 times and then assassinated. And John Lewis was almost beaten to death and then became a congressperson. So my opponent's telling people that I'm a radical, I won't get along with legislators. And I say, well, we all believe in the same values of social justice that Martin Luther King and John Lewis fought for. So I don't understand why you would not see that that would be important for us to continue on in the state legislators. So yeah, I got in a little trouble, and it's because because climate change is going to happen in the next 8 years, and I don't have hope. I have kids, and I don't want to give lip service. I want to be in action and write laws that outlaw the problem.
You know, Congressman Lewis describes himself as having made good trouble for more than 50 years now, since he was helping to organize the March on Washington. And he's also facing a struggle of his own. And I'm wishing him, I know you are too, victory in this fight that is threatening his life right now. I take a lot of inspiration from his words, and obviously from Dr. King's, who said that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And I know you are no stranger to challenge a controversy. You invite it and you overcome it. And this Green New Deal, in a closing minute here, can you tell us, with respect to the community where you live and hope to represent on the Western Slope, like what the Green New Deal would mean for them? Yeah,
well, I think we should pull the aperture back and say, guys, we have a 5-fold problem. We have one of public health and pandemic. We have one of economics. We're going into a depression. We have another one of federalism, where Trump is saying, go bankrupt yourself, states. And then we have a 4th, and that is one of democracy and/or elections. And the 5th is transitioning into renewable energies. And we have 50,000 fracking wells, and Colorado is an oil and gas state. And I'm trying to run as a progressive, saying it's not about banning fracking. Fracking already banned itself. It went bankrupt. And what we're trying to do is figure out how to do a wealth tax, or how to not talk austerity and find dollars on the federal level, on the state level, and local levels. Well, we're watching in the high country has the highest unemployment rates, and we're almost at 500,000 Coloradoans just filed unemployment in the
Yep.
last 2 months. So everyone's going out of business, everyone's losing their job. We're losing vital services like our teachers and our firefighters, et cetera. And we need to find out. So if I can get elected, and today's my birthday, so I'm asking for Andrew, obviously, if he could give me the best birthday present and Christmas present by endorsing this race so I could win against my opponent and go on and flip the seat. The other is buy Arn a coffee, $10 for the coffee. But we're, Andrew's got a great sense of humor. Mine's a little better and drier. But the thing that we're trying to say is what Andrew was touching on with the quotes is it's about being engaged in something called democracy, not just voting, helping Andrew make phone calls for his race, helping him knock on doors, learning about the right issues, and getting involved. You don't have to get arrested like I did in order to bring attention to a problem. You can run for office or you can make calls, but it goes beyond the voting booth.
Yeah, I take that point. And Seth's telling me we're at 1 here. I want to say to you, happy birthday, for one thing.
Thank you.
I'm happy to buy you a cup of coffee. I know.
I'm sorry, I'm getting old. I don't hear. So, did you say endorsement? You want
coffee?
What?
I said coffee. I'm buying you coffee.
Oh, okay.
I don't even drink coffee. I need to. I picked the wrong year to stop.
Well, tonight we have an FAC called Buy Arn a Corona beer.
Buy Arn a beer. Yeah, well, you've upgraded from coffee.
Hey, guess what's in the cup?
All right, so that's going to be the challenge. Guess what's in Arn's cup? We're going to turn that into a hashtag, but he already provided a hint. Listen, I want to say to Arn Manconi, soon to be 61 years old, today or tomorrow, did you say?
Right now, we're in the middle of it.
The birthday it's a week. That's why we're celebrating Memorial Day. I want to say to all of the veterans who are here and to families who have lost loved ones in service to our nation, we're honoring you on this Memorial Day weekend. I want to say thanks to Arn and thanks to Joe and thanks to all of you for joining us. And I hope that you'll come
Andrew,
back next week.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all. And I hope you stay well and stay safe this holiday weekend. And happy Memorial Day.